we have control over it. It's one of the coolest things about being a human being is that we get to define what success means. We get to define what any given set of circumstances means in our life.
All right, Joshua, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. Excited to be here today.
To start, I want to I want you to tell me a story about a guy named Dave, and this guy named Dave uh, is in a band called Megadeth. Pretty well-known band to a lot of people, but Dave was unhappy, and I think this has something to do with how we define success. Can you tell the story about Dave, his band, and why, despite Megadeth doing a lot of amazing things, he still wasn't quite happy about it?
Yeah, so it's a great story that my friend James Clear tells in one of his articles that he writes. I think James is probably the greatest writer of my generation. And he tells a story about Dave and how Dave, he was in this band and he just, he really, really like he believed that success was in he defined it in a way that was like in relation to other people. And, he had gotten kicked out of a band when he was about 21 years old, and he'd been on the pinnacle of making it with that band, and at the last second, right before they were going to record their album, he got a bus ticket and sent back to Los Angeles from New York City. And so his whole life he kind of devoted to making a band that was more successful than that band he got kicked out of, that got more girls, that sold more records, that toured the world more. And he defined success in a way that was completely hinged upon comparison to this other band. And, there's a great quote that comparison is the thief of all joy. I think it was from Teddy Roosevelt's wife. And, so comparison is the thief of all joy. And this dude becomes incredibly, quote unquote, successful. Megadeth sells tens of millions of albums. They travel the world. They do all of these things. And towards the end of his career, he was being interviewed, and somebody asked him, "Do you consider yourself to be successful?" And he broke down in tears as a grown man. And he said, "No, absolutely not." Because the band that he got kicked out of was Metallica, who had done 10 times the amount of sales and touring and everything that Megadeth did. And so it's a very, you know, interesting tale to me in terms of, okay, we need to be really, really careful how we define success, because if we fall for some of these traps that society lays for us, we can so easily get caught up chasing things that don't really matter and just setting ourselves up for failure. I think in so many different ways, human beings are so fascinating in terms of how they create these mind games for themselves, that it's like, if it's raining, well, I never play good when it's raining. Or, if we have a bad first quarter, then that means the rest of the year is terrible. If we have a bad earnings call, or if our if this person does this, then this means this, like, and we create these games in our head that, like, oh, I've got to wear my lucky socks, and if I'm not wearing my socks, then I can't do well. Or if I don't get this exact formula of food, or if I don't sleep this exact way, or do we just create all these games in our head. And it's we have control over it. It's one of the coolest things about being a human being is that we get to define what success means. We get to define what any given set of circumstances means in our life.
How do you define it for your life?
Yeah, great question. So I've had a very interesting kind of traumatic life. And when I was 9 years old, my baby brother drowned. He pulled himself out, or I had to pull him out of the pool. Whenever I was 14, I lost a coach who was like a brother to me to prison. Whenever I was 14, I lost a coach to prison. Whenever I was 16, I lost another coach to prison. When I was 21, my dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer. My dad was 49 years old when he got diagnosed with that. My dad had grown up in a trailer park where he had to duct tape his trailer together. He worked incredibly hard, somehow ends up becoming an eye surgeon down the road. And I watched how, when he got diagnosed with terminal cancer, all of a sudden, stuff that had never mattered in his life, all of a sudden mattered a lot. And stuff that, the flip side of that, the things that hadn't really matter, things that mattered didn't, and just back and forth. And I was just like, whoa, like, I don't want to wait until I have terminal cancer to appreciate everything that God has given me. I don't want to live my life in that way. And so that's kind of how I have defined success for myself, is that I've always wanted to, I've always asked myself that question. If I got terminal cancer today and I had 6 months to live, am I living my life in a way that it wouldn't change anything?
Hmm.
And I think that I've lived, pretty true to that. Definitely, there's times when it's been better than others, but that's really, the way that I've defined success, is just really living life in a way that I could get diagnosed with terminal cancer and it doesn't change anything. Kind of living life on my own terms, putting first things first. I'm working on a book right now called Finish Empty. What does it look like to live a truly successful life from a deathbed perspective? And so, I think that a lot of times we get caught up chasing stuff that on our deathbed just won't really matter. And so then there's another quote that I love, that the purpose of life is not to arrive safely at death. And so, I've really tried to live my life in a way that is bold and courageous, and chasing the stuff that sets my soul on fire. So some combination of that, being relentless in the pursuit of what sets my soul on fire, living bold and courageous, understanding that the purpose of life is not to arrive safely at death. I don't want to live life through this, like, ooh, I want to be safe lens. No, I want to live my life in the arena. And then, like I said, live it in a way that I could get diagnosed with terminal cancer and somebody could come in right now and say, Joshua, you have 6 months to live. We just found this out. And I would say, thank you. Can I get back to this podcast that I'm recording with Ryan? Like, that's how I define success.
I think a lot of people want to do that. They say, "Yeah, I want to do the same thing, Joshua. However, I have a spouse and 3 kids and 2 cars and a mortgage, and I got to pay the bills, man. So that
Mhm.
sounds great, but real life says go get a job and pay those bills because you have
Yeah.
responsibilities." How do you respond to that?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's very real. That's a very real situation for a lot of people. The one thing I'll say is that sometimes, last night I played in a golf tournament, and the guy afterwards was asking me some questions and saying stuff. And he's like, "Oh yeah, well, it's really nice that, like, your life is like that." And I'm like, "Well, hold on. Like, I skipped scholarships to law school to move across the country and live and serve in a homeless shelter downtown Los Angeles, and I lived there and served there for 7 months. And then from there, I moved into the closet of a gym, and I lived in the closet of a gym for 9 months. And I was going into the Watts housing projects and training the athletes in the toughest housing project in the country. And then my mom came out and saw me and stayed with me in the closet of the gym. And she was like, I don't want you living in the closet of a gym anymore. And so we got a small apartment together, and I lived with my mom for 5 years. And I made a lot of intentional choices and sacrifices. And once again, to me, it kind of comes back to this principle from C.S. Lewis, where he says, when we put first things first, secondary things aren't suppressed, they're increased. And everybody's situation is different. Some people may have gotten themselves into a situation where there may not be that much that they can do. I think everybody's context is different. Every individual has a unique set of circumstances. But I also know that there are people around the world praying for the circumstances that most of the people that are listening to this
Yeah.
are in. And so, again, I think that there's a lot of relationship that needs to be, and there needs to be boundaries. But in some of those cases, depending on the context of my relationship with some of those people, I would say, look, man, yeah, you got a lot of legitimate excuses. However, one question I asked one of my close friends when he told me that he really felt like he was supposed to be pursuing this big thing, I said, well, what would you tell your kid? He said, I would tell him to chase his dreams. And I said, well, you damn well better have chased yours. So
Mm.
whatever's getting in the way, sell the house, downsize, sell a car, take a bike. Like I I don't know, man. Like, and I say this having made a lot of these choices and having made a lot of these sacrifices. Like, a lot of it's bullshit. It's just stuff that we go, oh, well, I can't do this because of this. No, you're making a choice.
Hmm.
And look, at the end of the day, that's a choice you get to make. But I'm sorry, there are different choices that you can make. And a lot of people don't want to do that. And that's okay. But just know that that's a choice. And that if you made different choices for 3 to 5 years, you could have very different outcomes.
Hmm.
And the biggest thing to me is that what are you modeling for your kids? That's the thing that to me is what really matters. I mean, I we've never lived through a time, especially the last 10 years. It, you no longer the gatekeepers are pretty much gone.
Hmm.
Like if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to get in the arena, if you're willing to look foolish, if you're willing to make the sacrifices, if you're willing to make the choices to, you know, one of the things that really set my career off a long time ago was I just realized, this guy named Russ Pillar asked me a question. He said, Joshua, what do you do with all your time? And I was like, oh, buddy, let me tell you what I do with my time. I'm down in the Watts housing projects serving these kids. I'm throwing humanitarian events for some of the most impoverished people around the city of Los Angeles. And I need a social life, right? And he bought my answer. He said, okay. And he let it go. But I think, and knowing Russ as I have for probably 15 years now, I think he knew what he was doing. He was planting a seed in there that then later that night, whenever I was trying to go to bed, and John Wooden always said that the softest pillow was a clear conscience, and my conscience was not clear. My pillow felt like a hard rock, and that question just kept banging around my head. What do you do with all your time? 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 Because I had these really big dreams. But when I actually looked at how I used my time and my willingness to sacrifice, it was not in direct proportion to the size of my dreams. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to cut Facebook, TV, chilling, social media, all this stuff out of my life. And I started studying and training like I was in medical school. I was
Hmm.
studying and reading for 12 to 14 hours a day. And here again, I can even hear the listeners going, well, that's not feasible for me. Well, I I don't know, man. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is. Maybe your ego's getting in the way. Maybe your ego is saying, well, oh, I can't do that. Well, maybe your fear mechanism is getting in the way. Oh, that's impossible. What would I do? Well, I don't know. Maybe it is impossible for you, but is it impossible to read for 3 hours a day? Is it possible to get yourself into a situation and your kids and your family into a situation where you're not just trying to impress other people and you're not worried about what you're giving your kid in terms of things and what it looks like on the outside, and you're actually understanding that the biggest things that your kids need are your best time, your best energy, and your best love. You know how many dads I have that lie to me and say, oh, I'm doing this for my family. No, you're not. Doing it for your ego, man. It's very obvious that you're doing it for your ego. To any objective outsider, it's so obvious. Not doing it for your kids. Your kids need your best time. They need your best energy. They need your love. You're doing it because it feeds your ego. You like to be the man. You like to make a lot of money. You like to show people who you are. That's not what your kids need. Your kids need to have modeled for them what it looks like to be relentless in the pursuit of what sets their soul on fire. They need to see what putting first things first really looks like. They need to see somebody who puts their money where their mouth is and actually lives this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That is what they need. They're desperate for that. Kids are, and the thing is like in this world we live in today, kids know so much faster. They can do a lot of research on their own and find out whether you're the real deal. You can't fake it anymore. And so if you live this life, if you make these sacrifices, I mean, how cool is it to be able to have these conversations with your kids of like, hey, we're downsizing. We're moving into my family's home in their basement. This is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing this. Because I'm going to make sacrifices because I want to model for you what it looks like. And you may even be upset with me right now, but down the road, you're going to understand something different because I was willing to make different choices. I was willing to make sacrifices. And again, I think to me, I never tell people what to do. I always try and ask them, what is your big dream? What what do you want? Because if you want that, there's so many stories out there. There's so much evidence and research around, okay, well, if you'll devote this amount of time, or if you will make these sacrifices, or if you will do these certain things, that it's crazy what can happen in 3 to 5 years of head down, completely focused, completely immersed, studying, training in the trenches. And so, yeah, I, I feel like, you know, to me, it was, I asked myself that question. Joshua, you've got these huge dreams. You really want to change the world. But does your willingness to sacrifice and the way that you use your time, is it in direct proportion to the size of those dreams? Because the thing about time is that time is the exact same resource for everybody. And we have an addiction to busyness in our country. So everybody gets 86,400 seconds a day. The only resource is the exact same for everyone, whether you are the guys that live down the street for my girlfriend here that live on the street, or whether you're the mayor of Los Angeles, or whether you're a top dog in Hollywood, whether you're the president of a country. We only get 24 hours a day, 86,400 seconds. So a great determining factor of who we become, what we achieve, where we end up is, how do we use our 86,400 seconds? Are we willing to make those sacrifices? Are we willing to make those choices? Are we willing to live different? So many people want a top 1% life, but they're doing the same exact thing that the 99% does. And then when you go and you look at the people that are living these top 1% lives, sure, there's going to be a few of them that had a silver spoon, but most of the time, they made radically different choices. They bet on themselves. They were willing to sacrifice. They were willing to take the road less traveled. It didn't happen on accident. And if you don't want that type of life, that's okay too. But just be honest with yourself. Don't be like, oh, I can't do this. No, it's not that you can't do it. It's that you're making a choice and you're too scared to do it. And that's okay. There's lots of stuff that scares me. There's lots of stuff that I just won't do. But I'm not going to make excuses and go, oh, well, I can't do that. Well, it's easy for you to say this, Josh. Well, Sure, but like again, this is a lifetime of making these types of choices, and I've seen and read and interacted with enough people that have chosen to do something dramatic, whether it's quitting their jobs and getting on a boat and sailing with their kids around the world, and you know having a podcast that they run around. There's just all these different things that people have done. There's a lot of other places around the world that are less expensive to live. There are all these things. And so, but at the end of the day, it's getting in the mirror and asking yourself that question: is my willingness to sacrifice and how I use my 86,400 seconds every single day in direct proportion to the size of my dreams? And
What
then for parents, it's, and does that reflect what I want to be embedded in my children? Because your kids don't care what you say, they care what you do.
you had quite a career as a soccer player in college. I would say there are some tough moments and some great moments. I'd love to hear about your college soccer career and what you learned from going through those highs and lows.
Yeah, very good question. Um, it was a very tumultuous career. I would say that I struggled the majority of the time, truthfully. So I had a 10% scholarship to play at Vanderbilt, and I was kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years. And, it was just one thing after another. And, I was always the kid that people believed was super talented, but I was a head case. And so, it was getting in a fight, or getting in a fight on the field, or yelling at my coach. Um, all this stuff that just had nothing really to do with soccer. It was all this extracurricular stuff that I just couldn't get out of my own way. And I really ultimately ended up learning that I was my own worst enemy as well. I was my own worst critic. And so after my junior year at Vanderbilt, they ended up cutting the soccer program. So there's no men's soccer program at Vanderbilt anymore. And I didn't have a single real offer to go anywhere else. So, again, my dad grew up in a trailer park. The fact that I got to go to Vanderbilt was a really big deal. I had a 21 on my ACT. The fact that I got into Vanderbilt was pretty crazy. I was having dinner with uh, the girl I call my sister from Vanderbilt and her family last week. And her husband goes, "Wait, a 21? Like, how did you get into Vanderbilt?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was just pretty good at soccer, man." Like, he's like, "No, but at 21, like they give you an 18 for signing your name." I was like, "I know." And that was a combined score too. I think the real gross score was like a 20. So it was a big deal that I got into Vanderbilt. And I decided that I was just going to hang up my cleats and I was going to focus on soccer. And then my birthday of my senior year at Vanderbilt, Joe Germanese called, and he had transferred to Duke when the program got cut. And he said, "Hey, man, are you interested in coming to play soccer at Duke?" And I was like, I think a better question is the number one team in the country interested in a guy that got kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years, who had mediocre soccer statistics, and who just got cut from the Vanderbilt club team 3 months ago? And he was like, "Yeah, man, I vouched for you. We had a guy that got injured. I think you should try and come out here and let's figure this out." So by the grace of God, I ended up getting a full ride scholarship to work on my master's and play on the number one team in the country. But then I'm now playing with and against some of the best players in the country. And when we play pickup games, they always choose me dead last. So my teammates say, of 27 people, you are the worst of the worst. And at the same time, I was taking a sports psychology class with Greg Dale, and Greg Dale asked us a question. He said, "How much of sports do you guys think are mental?" And people are going around the room and they're like 50, 80, 90. One girl was like, "I think that they're 100% mental, Greg. It's 100% mental." And this is mostly like athletes from Duke. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, "Are you all crazy? Like, if sports are over 70, 80, 90% mental, why do all we do is physical training? Nobody's taught us how to do mental training. We've been lied to our whole lives. Like, I've done a ton of down and backs, I've done a ton of technical training. Nobody's ever taught us this. Greg Dale told us he thought that sports were over 70% mental. And if that were true, the implications were pretty grave for the leadership that we've had and the training that we had. And so I was really frustrated, and I didn't even want to believe this guy. I was like, dude, you've never played in front of tens of thousands of people. You never played sports at a high level. But he did work with guys like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Ichiro, banking leaders would fly in from around the world to meet with them. And I was the last pick on the team. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to attempt to do what this guy talks about. And in a very short period of 2 months, I went from being the last pick on the team to being the Duke Student Athlete of the Week, the ACC Player of the Week, and finishing second in points on our team to the very best player in the country, Mike Grella. He opened his career at Leeds United with a hat trick. And so I went, oh man, the implications of this are huge. Yeah, I only got this for 2 months. What if I had been taught this whenever I was 10 years old?
Mm.
What if this was being taught all over the world? Why did I have to get to Duke to learn this? Why aren't kids in impoverished, underserved areas of America not learning this stuff? And Greg Dale told me, Joshua, I love this. I love that you're passionate about this. You need to go to Tennessee. You need to get a sports psychology degree, and you could really do well with this. And I was like, nah, I I'm just gonna move into a homeless shelter, and I think I'm gonna just tell my story, and I'm gonna go down a journey, and I'm gonna learn and study and read on my own, and I'm just gonna try and take this stuff to the masses. And so yeah, that was, for me on the soccer field, it was so eye-opening because I realized pretty quickly this didn't just apply to soccer. It was just soccer was the high pressure cooker that I was in to be able to apply it in the moment. It was like this applies to everything. We're all typically our own worst enemy and our own worst critic. That when we make a mistake, we just beat ourselves up. And I realized when he taught me how to use, he called it positive self talk. I don't like that. I call it beneficial and constructive self talk. And, but when I started learning how to do that, and when I would make a mistake, I would say, the next opportunity I get, I'm going to create a goal. The next opportunity I get, I'm going to score a goal. And then I kind of saw that starting to work. And I was like, why do I need to wait until I make a mistake to start sewing this into my heart? And so I just started walking around the field at all times, just talking out loud, like the next opportunity I get, I'm going to create a goal. The next opportunity I get, I'm going to score a goal. And all of a sudden, I was far from the best player on that team. I actually had a kid one time who came up to me and he goes, dude, how do you score goals for our team? Because you're not good at soccer. Like, you're not good. I don't understand. And it's true. And I've always been different in sports. So that part wasn't that confusing. But I understood where he was coming from. But what I realized is all of a sudden, instead of focusing on problems and mistakes and everything that was going wrong, I was directing my focus towards the next opportunity. And so I started to see little small half chances that other people didn't see because my brain was scanning, looking, trying to find them. And so I saw that. I saw the power of visualization. I had never been able to really head the ball in general. And I'm 6'2". I was a big, tall soccer player, but I was never good with my head, never scored a goal with my head, never even close to it. And so when Greg Dale started teaching us about the power of visualization, I was like, yeah, how am I going to know the difference between my physical practice and this kind of voodoo magic stuff you're talking about? Oh, just see yourself doing this and you can get better. I was like, that's kind of weird, man. And I was like, I know how to test this. And so my litmus test for it was with scoring a goal with my head, because I was like, I've never done this. So every day I tried to see myself, for 2 or 3 minutes, I would try and visualize myself scoring a goal with my head. And it was really hard because, like I said, I almost never headed the ball in general. So I had very little memories to even go off of. But I was just trying to do it the best that I could. Well, uh, sure enough, I can't remember now which came first, but I'll tell you the really good one that I scored. We were playing against Virginia Tech, and I made a run in the box. Zach Pope whips in a ball, and without even thinking, I just jump up in the air and snap head this ball back post upper 90. If Sports Center was around back then and covered, college sports the way that they do now, and so many cameras and video cameras out there, it would have made top 10. Like, it was a ridiculously beautiful, amazing goal. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my gosh. I watched it on film afterwards, um, probably 1,000 times. We had this thing called ACC Select, and it was this grainy footage, but like I just kept watching it, like I can't believe this is me. And then I'm pretty sure it was the next week we were playing um, against Virginia, and 30 seconds left in the game. We're down 1-0. We're just dumping balls into the box. And I kind of, on this one, I just jumped up, kind of closed my eyes. Ball hits off the top of my head, somehow goes in the goal, floats over the goalkeeper's head. We tie the game. Mike Grella scores in overtime. We win. And so within like a month of implementing this, I end up scoring 2 goals with my head. And once again, it was just like, dude, what in the world? Like, how often have I been getting in my own way? Like, how many of these things? So it's interesting the way we started this, right? Of you saying, well, some of these listeners are going, well, Joshua, my life, this, that, I can't. Kenny Smith, the former NBA basketball player, who's on TNT, and I think they got that really famous show with Charles Barkley and Ernie. And Kenny Smith talks about his dad always told him, that life was about breaking through paper ceilings. And I love that phrase and that analogy, because I feel like there's so many of those that we look at and we're like, man, I there's this feeling, and I just can't get through this. Or it's like we're in this prison, but the prison walls are paper mache, right? And we're looking at it going, I can't get out of this. Like, I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do. And it's like, you can break through that. It's just paper. But it's been drawn to look like it's real and it's metal and there's no way out of this. And so, and then a lot of the conditioning that happens, in our lives, we get told, well, this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you do it. And I think we're starting to realize this, but maybe some people haven't fully realized. But a lot of the way the system is designed, right, from the time we're very, very young, the system is designed in a certain way to get you to think a certain way, to get you to act a certain way, to get you to have certain consumer habits, spending habits. It's designed to create somewhat comfortable prison cells for you to live, work, and operate in. You know, Kids aren't designed to sit still for 6 hours a day. But what do we do to kids? We tell them, sit down, shut up, get in line. Well, that's not how we're wired at all. But that's how we're conditioned. And then we're told, this is the right answer. This is what you need to do. This is how you do. And it's a system that is designed to beat out originality, individuality. It's designed in a certain way, and it was designed intentionally. And whether it was intentionally designed to do exactly what it's done now, or it evolved over time, it serves a function. When we move towards an industrialized society, we needed people that would be able to sit at a little station for 8 to 10 hours a day and do the same thing over and over again, not question the system and do exactly what they're told. That was the way that our country would be able to, quote unquote, prosper, right? And so when you start to understand that, then I think the paper mache prison analogy makes a lot more sense, that this illusion has been created to keep you, buying stuff that you don't even need to impress people that you don't like, and all these different things that are designed to have you have a mortgage that you can't really afford, or cars that you can't really afford, that keep you trapped, that keep you in the thing that you don't even like doing. Like, it all works in concert together. And so there's a story that I love about elephants, that there's this father that takes his kids to some sort of animal sanctuary, and immediately just freaks out and screams, and he runs and grabs a one of the park rangers, and he's like, dude, what's going on? You've got these giant beasts that are roaming around, and their handlers just have them, tied to a little rope. Like, these elephants, like, they could kill my kids. What are you doing here? And they're like, sir, calm down. What you don't know is that we've had these elephants from the time that they're very, very young. And when they're very young, what we do is we tie a strong rope around their leg and we tie it to a strong tree. And what they will do is they will pull and they will freak out and they will try and break free from it. And they can't, they're not strong enough at that time. And so what ends up happening is it ends up breaking their will. And then anytime now that they have that rope tied to their leg, they believe that they are powerless. They believe that they can't break free from that. And the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what the system is designed to condition us into. It is designed to break our will. That's why when you go into a kindergarten class and you ask kids, how many of you are artists? Every single kid's hand shoots up in the air. But then by the time you get to seventh grade, one, maybe two kids' hands will raise in the air. The system and conditioning is designed to put us into a little box, shave off all of the unique edges that we have, and make us fit into these little things that look just like everybody else. And so it's very sad and scary to me, because we have these ropes tied to us and we could cut the ropes. We're strong enough now, but we've been so conditioned that it's like, oh man, what would I do if, you know, what would people think if I quit my job and I move my family back in with my parents? Or I quit my job and we downsized and we just lived off of our savings for 3 years while I actually pursued, what sets my soul on fire. Like, all these things, like, what would people think? Like, my mom took so much grief when I didn't write my master's thesis at Duke. Like, people came out of the, what do you mean he didn't write? You need to make him write that master's thesis. And I was just like, no, there's just something in my gut that every time I try and write this paper that's going to collect dust on somebody's desk, it doesn't sit very well with me. And then it got even crazier because, number one, I did send an email to my director when she followed up about it. And I said, I'm not going to I'm not going to write a paper that collects dust on somebody's desk. I said, I'm going to create an organization that changes the world. And, at the time, she probably thought I was young, naive, and arrogant. Um, could make a strong argument that I've done what I set out to do. But it got really interesting when Pepperdine asked me to teach sports psychology whenever I was about 26, 27. And they said, "Well, you have a master's, right? You got your master's from Duke. It doesn't matter if it's in sports psychology. You just need your master's to be able to teach. And well, you can teach sports psychology here." And I was like, "Yeah, so the thing is, like, I had a 4.0 at Duke, but I didn't write my master's thesis." And then my mom was like, "You need to go beg them. You just write that paper." Like, and I remember telling her, I said, "Mom, God has something better in store for me." I was like, "I knew that I wasn't supposed to write that paper. I'm not worried about it." And that looked crazy, right? That looked insane. Here's one of the most prestigious institutions in America, set in Malibu, on the water, incredibly gorgeous. And they're offering to give you a position teaching something that you don't even have a degree in, and all you need is a master's. But I'm so grateful that it didn't play out that way, because if I had gotten that safe, secure job, I never would have had the entrepreneurial fire. I never would have been forced to do the things that I did, to create the things that I created, to have to and only be able to eat what I kill. And it allowed me to impact so many more people, in my opinion, because I knew that I would never be able to rely on a safe, secure job, because I chose not to write my master's thesis. So I wasn't going to be able to get those opportunities. The only way I was going to be able to get opportunities is I knew, and this is why I studied and trained and basically tried to give myself a PhD. I knew that I was going to have to be so much better than the guys that had the PhDs, or I had no shot, because I knew people were going to have to put a lot on the line to get me in, because they're going to be like, "Well, wait, why are we bringing in this guy that doesn't have these credentials whenever we've got a guy over here that has a PhD?" And I needed them to say whatever it is, but like, because this is the real stuff. This guy is so much better. And so, yeah, that is to me, a lot of this is about breaking through those paper ceilings. And once you break through the paper ceilings, once you cut those ropes, you start to realize, oh my gosh, what else is actually possible? Like, what else can I actually do? I took my girlfriend down to Costa Rica to do this thing with Paddle Nine, because the first time I went on this excursion with them, there's this waterfall in the middle of the jungle. It's about 70 feet long, and you can slide face first down it. And I was scared to death. I mean, the first time we went down, Matt went down on his feet and checked the water depth, and I went down on my feet, and then he went face first. And so I saw it. So I'm like, I know this is possible. I know you're not going to die if you do this. But yet, the fear mechanism of going face first down a waterfall in the middle of the jungle in a second world country, I'm like, whew, buddy. But I kid you not, when I finally pushed off and I did it, chains broke off of me, ropes got cut, paper mache exploded in my head. And it was like, whoa, I, what else is possible out there? Like, it's just so amazing how those things can happen. And it, it eliminated so many excuses. It cut so many of those ropes in my life that, again, like, man, I believed for so long I couldn't score a goal with my head. And then 2 weeks after doing these exercises, all of a sudden I'm doing it. I think that, there's a phrase, that same guy that was saying, I don't know how you got into to Vanderbilt with the 21 on your ACT, Matt Kessler, who's become like a brother-in-law to me, really, really brilliant dude. Um, and he tells the boys, Kieran and Jack every morning. He tells them, be curious and kind. And so often I think we jump to judgment instead of curiosity. And when people see stuff, when they see somebody living a certain type of life, I think that the 99% go, oh, well, and they fill in some excuses, whatever it is, they jump to judgment. I think that the 1% gets curious and goes, huh, how did you do that? What what led you to this place? What tools did you have? What mindset did you have? What heart posture did you have? What sacrifices did you make? How did this happen? And that pivot of curiosity versus judgment all of a sudden then opens up their mind to be able to glean wisdom from somebody that's walked a different path, right? The map is not the territory. I don't want to learn from a map. I want to learn from somebody that's navigated the actual physical territory that can tell me, hey, man, I know that Google Maps says this, but I was just there. And you actually, if you'll take this left and then you'll duck down this tunnel, you'll actually pop up over here. And I know this because I've done it, because I live in the trenches and I live in the territory. I'm not just a map maker. I'm not just making these maps from books. I'm not just making these maps from things that I've read on the internet. I actually have done this. I'm actually traversing the territory. And I just think that when we have that curiosity instead of judgment of, oh, well, this person is, and oftentimes they're true things. Like I'm keenly aware that I'm 6'2", I'm white, and that by the time I was 16 years old, I was in a very privileged household. Completely get that. I understand that my dad being 6'2" and white uh, allowed him to have different opportunities to get out of the housing projects in trailer parks in different ways that would not be the same if he looked different. But again, there's always going to be legitimate excuses. There are people out there. I mean, the dude that played in the NFL that was deaf, like there's a dude playing Division I basketball that has one arm. Like there's a guy that I believe made it to professionals, but that played at Baylor that has one eye. Like it can be your excuse or it can be your story, but if you come at it from this mindset and heart posture of curiosity, it's going to open up new neurological pathways for you to be able to see stuff or an experiment with things that could probably change the trajectory of your life. And more importantly, for those that have the most excuses, once again, it's about setting your kids up with a mindset, with a heart posture of shifting them towards curiosity instead of judgment. It's moving them towards a life of possibility instead of a life of plan. And this is what you have to do, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do until you die. And it sucks, and you just got to grit your teeth and bear it. And no, like what's actually possible. And the only
You
way we're going to find that out is if we seek out the tough stuff. We run towards the fear. We run towards the pain. We run towards hard stuff. When we finish, I'll go to LA Fitness, which I don't necessarily love that gym, but there's a lot of them around the world. And I'm a nomad right now. I haven't had a home for 5 months. And so there's this gym in Hollywood, and I've gone to a lot of the other ones, and none of them have a cold tub. And so I go to this gym that's not very nice, it's not very clean, and but it has this cold tub, and they have two huge hot tubs, and they have one tiny cold tub. You already know what I'm going to tell you. 99% of people go to the hot tub.
Sure.
I've seen like two people actually get into the cold tub and sit in it and be in it. And it's something that I seek out because I know that so much of life, so much of performance, so much of, especially in golf in particular, is who can be more comfortable being uncomfortable when they don't have to go get into the cold tub.
Hmm.
Who is willing to go to the gym when, they don't really need to, whenever it's safe, whenever it's warm, whenever everything's going well. Like, who's willing to make these choices? Who's willing to run towards what scares them? Who's willing to run towards what's hard? Because if you'll run towards those things for long enough, then eventually you're going to need to call on it. Eventually you're going to need it. And it's it if you've run towards that for long enough, then whenever life shows up and gets really hard, you got a chance. But if you've run from hard your whole life, if you tried to make things as easy as possible, if you are always choosing the easy path, if you're always choosing the path of excuses, then yeah, life is going to beat the shit out of you. Judgment and then seeking out this perceived safety and this perceived easy to take over, instead of like, nope, I'm going to run towards what's hard. I'm going to run towards what scares me. I'm going to do this stuff to become strong right now whenever I can, so that whenever I am faced with something, I have a chance. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, dude, life is hard, man. Life is going to punch us in the face. And, will we have done the work in the dark to develop a chin? Or do we just get knocked down and go, yep, that's just, that's it. Nothing I can do. Like, well, there's always something you can do.
Yeah. You wrote on your Instagram profile that your most famous book is Chop Wood, Carry Water, but your favorite is Pound the Stone. Why is that?
Yeah. Kind of a little bit of what I was just talking about. Chop Wood, Carry Water, to me, yes, it is an amazing book. And I tried to distill down a lot of the best wisdom in the world into very easily digestible, very tangible things to do, things to process. It's at a level where an 8 or 9 year old could understand it, and many 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 year olds have read it, and it's impacted their life. To me, it's just very level one,
Hmm.
and I I love the book, but one of my biggest issues with the book is that people read that book and they think it's easy. B, they stop and they think that I've written one book. They act like it's the only book that I've written and it was the first and the last. It's the third and fourth book that I published, and I've published nine. And so it to me, if you just take that book and you take it out of context, it's very easily used in ways that I would argue aren't the most beneficial and constructive in lots of different scenarios. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm writing Finish Empty. And it's a sequel where Akira, one of the sensei and kind of, father figure, mentor figure in the book, he is going to try and unpack some of the ways that chopwood has been used and abused and what it actually is supposed to have done and been, and that he's going to address it. But to me, Pound the Stone deals with heart posture. It deals with uh, suicide. It deals with really, really deep, hard life stuff.
Hmm.
I think you can get the impression if you just read Chop Wood, Carry Water that I'm a big positivity guy, that I'm about, kind of fluff and just, oh, let's just be positive and let's just think this way and everything's going to be great. And I think if you watch me on something like this, you realize pretty quickly that's not the case. But just reading that book without that context, that's kind of the impression I think some people get. When you read Pound the Stone, I think it's a lot more obvious that no, this is dirty hard work. This is chasing hard stuff. This is dealing with the real stuff in life that is that's what actually bogs people down most of the time. Like you can do all the level one stuff and chop wood, carry water, and still end up with a lot of challenges. I think the stuff that I wrote about in Pound the Stone has more to do with that deathbed perspective and the heart posture and the mindset and just uh, to me it's if somebody was only going to read one of my books, I would want them to read Pound the Stone.
Well, I highly recommend them, and loved getting to dig into your books, man. And I love your writing style as well as they're just told in a way it reminds a little bit of Pat Lencioni, as well as how you tell the story using characters and sharing the lessons through the characters' voices. You inject yourself. So I know we're right at time. I really appreciate all that you shared, and certainly appreciate stuff that you've published, man. It's obviously, as you know, making a difference in so many people's lives. So Joshua, thanks so much for being here, man. I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Absolutely, buddy. I appreciate you having me on and I hope that your listeners gain some value from it.